Welcome to Where Shadows Hide Secrets and Every Tale Unravels a Mystery. Tonight, we present Blood on the Smuggler's Bridge, a chilling Miss Marple story. Settle in, dim the lights, and join us on this journey into the unknown. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of suspense. Chapter 1. The Shadow on the Bridge. The mist hung low over St Albans, curling like a living thing around the gnarled oaks and the uneven stones of the Smuggler's Bridge. It was October, and the air carried a damp chill that seeped into the bones. Miss Jane Marple, bundled in her tweed coat and sensible scarf, paused at the edge of the village green, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. She had arrived only yesterday at the invitation of her old school friend Clara Winthrop, whose cottage sat at the heart of this quiet hamlet. But St Albans was not as peaceful as it seemed. Clara had written to her of troubling whispers in the village, tales of strange figures seen near the old bridge at dusk, of lanterns flickering where no soul should be. Miss Marple, ever curious about the undercurrents of human nature, had accepted the invitation with a twinge of intrigue. Now, as she stood beneath a grey sky, the weight of those whispers felt heavier than the fog. "Jane, you mustn't linger out here," Clara called from the cottage door, her voice tight with unease. She was a slight woman, her greying hair pinned neatly, though her hands fidgeted with a lace handkerchief. "The village isn't what it was, not since... well, you'll hear soon enough." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her knitting bag tucked under her arm. "My dear Clara, a village is never quite what it seems. Now tell me, what's got St Albans so rattled?" They sat by the fire in Clara's parlour, the crackle of logs a comforting counterpoint to the wind howling outside. Clara poured tea, her hands trembling slightly. "It's the bridge, Jane, the Smuggler's Bridge. Folks say it's cursed. Years ago, smugglers used it to ferry contraband, brandy, silks, even gold if you believe the tales. Some say they never stopped. And now..." She hesitated, her eyes darting to the window. "Last night, they found a body." Miss Marple's cup paused halfway to her lips. "A body?" she asked, her tone mild but her mind already turning. "A man, a stranger, found at the foot of the bridge, his coat torn and his face. Oh, Jane, it was dreadful. They say his skull was cracked, as if he'd fallen, or been pushed." "Who was he?" Miss Marple asked, her voice steady, though her fingers tightened around her cup. "No one knows. Not a local, that's certain. He had no papers, no name, just a gold pocket watch, engraved with initials, J.H., and a scrap of paper with a crude sketch of the bridge. The constable, young Mr. Harrow, thinks it was an accident, but the villagers, they're whispering murder." Miss Marple set her cup down, her mind conjuring the image of a crumpled figure beneath the bridge's shadow. "And what do you think, Clara?" Clara's eyes widened. "Me? Oh, I don't know, Jane. But there's been talk of lights on the bridge at night, and footsteps where no one walks. Old Mrs. Gibbs swears she saw a man in a long coat standing there just last week holding a lantern, and now this." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to the village characters she'd already observed. The gruff innkeeper, Mr. Tuttle, whose Red Lion pub was the heart of local gossip. The vicar, Reverend Lyle, whose nervous demeanour belied his sermons on peace. And the young widow, Eliza Drake, whose sharp beauty and sharper tongue had turned heads at the market. St Albans was a tapestry of secrets, and Miss Marple knew that a single loose thread could unravel it all. "Perhaps I'll take a walk to the bridge," she said, rising. "The air might do me good." Clara's face paled. "Jane, it's not safe. Not after dark." But Miss Marple only smiled. "I've always found the dark most illuminating." The path to the Smuggler's Bridge was narrow, flanked by gorse and bracken that rustled in the wind. The river below roared, swollen from recent rains, its waters black beneath the stone arch. The bridge itself was ancient, its moss-covered stones slick with mist. Miss Marple paused at its centre, her gloved hand resting on the parapet. The air smelled of damp earth and something sharper, iron perhaps, or fear. She closed her eyes, listening. The wind carried faint sounds, the distant bark of a dog, the creak of a branch, and footsteps. Her eyes snapped open, but the bridge was empty, the fog swallowing any trace of movement. Yet she felt it. A presence, as if the bridge itself held its breath. At the far end, where the path dipped toward the riverbank, she spotted a cluster of villagers, Constable Harrow, A lanky young man with an earnest face was shooing them back. "Nothing to see now," he called. "Go home, all of you." Miss Marple approached, her steps soft but deliberate. "Good evening, Constable," she said, her voice carrying the gentle authority of a schoolteacher. "Might I ask what happened here?" Harrow tipped his cap, though his eyes were wary. "Just an accident, ma'am. A man fell, hit his head. Nothing for a visitor like yourself to worry about." "Oh, I never worry," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "But I am curious. May I see where it happened?" Harrow hesitated, then gestured to a patch of muddy ground near the bridge's base. The earth was churned, as if by many feet, but a faint outline remained, a sprawl of limbs marked by a dark stain. Miss Marple knelt, her eyes tracing the scene. A broken branch lay nearby, its end stained red. A footprint, deep and deliberate, pressed into the mud, and half hidden in the grass a glint of gold. "Constable," she said, pointing. "What's that?" Harrow crouched, retrieving a small object. A cufflink, engraved with the same initials as the watch. J.H. "Must have missed this," he muttered, pocketing it. "Thank you, ma'am." Miss Marple said nothing, but her mind was alight. A stranger with no name, a gold watch, a cufflink, a sketch of the bridge, and that footprint, too large for the slight figure the villagers described. This was no accident. As she turned back toward the village, a figure emerged from the fog. Eliza Drake, her dark hair loose beneath a cloche hat, her eyes sharp as knives. "You're Miss Marple, aren't you?" she said, her voice low. "Clara's friend? Poking about already?" "Merely taking the air," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild. "It's a curious village, St. Albans." Eliza's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Curious, yes, but some secrets are best left buried." She turned, vanishing into the mist. Miss Marple watched her go, her thoughts weaving a pattern. A body, a bridge, a village full of whispers, and somewhere a killer who thought their secrets safe. But Jane Marple knew better. Secrets, like threads, always came loose in time. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Mist. The morning sun struggled through the fog that clung to St. Albans, casting a pale, watery light over the village green. Miss Jane Marple stepped carefully along the cobblestone path, her knitting bag swinging gently at her side. The events of the previous evening, the body beneath the smuggler's bridge, the gold cufflink, the cryptic footprint, had settled in her mind like pieces of a half-finished puzzle. She needed more threads to weave the pattern, and there was no better place to find them than the Red Lion pub, the beating heart of village gossip. The Red Lion stood at the corner of the green, its timbered facade weathered but proud, its sign creaking faintly in the breeze. Miss Marple pushed open the heavy door, a bell jingling above her. The interior was dim, lit by golden lamps that cast long shadows across the oak tables. The air smelled of ale, wood smoke, and secrets. A handful of villagers sat scattered about, their voices hushed but urgent, as if the weight of last night's discovery pressed on them all. Mr. Tuttle, the innkeeper, stood behind the bar, polishing a glass with more force than necessary. He was a burly man, his face ruddy and his eyes sharp, though they softened as he spotted Miss Marple. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice gruff but polite. "Didn't expect Clara's friend so early. Care for a cuppa?" "Tea would be lovely, thank you," Miss Marple said, settling at a table near the hearth. Her eyes, bright and unassuming, swept the room. Reverend Lyle sat in a corner, his thin fingers clutching a mug of cider, his gaze fixed on the window as if expecting a spectre. Eliza Drake, the young widow, leaned against the bar, her dark eyes flicking between Tuttle and the door, and at a table by the wall 2 farmhands, Tom Baines and Ned Carter, muttered over their pints, their voices low but heated. Miss Marple sipped her tea, letting the warmth steady her hands. "Such a quiet village," she remarked to Tuttle, her tone light, "but I hear there was quite a stir last night." Tuttle's cloth paused mid-swipe. "Aye, the bridge business. Terrible thing. Stranger, they say. Fell and cracked his head, poor soul." His eyes darted to the farmhands, then back to her. "Nothing to trouble a lady like yourself." "Oh, I'm not easily troubled," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "But a stranger in St. Albans, that's unusual, isn't it? Did he pass through here, perhaps?" Tuttle hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Might have. We get travellers now and then. Didn't notice anyone particular. but his hands resumed polishing with a touch too much vigour, and Miss Marple noted the flicker of unease in his eyes. She turned her attention to Reverend Lyle, who had risen and was making his way to the door. "Good morning, Reverend," she called softly. "I hope I'll see you at service tomorrow." The vicar started, his pale face flushing. "Oh, yes, Miss Marple, of course. I must prepare my sermon." He hurried out, his coat flapping like a startled bird. Eliza Drake watched him go, her lips curling into a faint sardonic smile. She sauntered over to Miss Marple's table, her cloche hat tilted at a defiant angle. "You've got everyone on edge, Miss Marple," she said, her voice low and teasing. "Poking about the bridge last night, asking questions. Folks here don't like questions." "Nor do they like murders," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild but her eyes sharp. "Unless you think it was an accident?" Eliza's smile faltered just for a moment. "Accident or not, it's got nothing to do with me. But if you're looking for answers, try the bridge again. Things get lost there. And found." She turned away, her heels clicking on the floorboards. Miss Marple finished her tea, her mind turning over Eliza's words. The widow was clever, perhaps too clever, and her hint about the bridge was no idle remark. She rose, leaving a coin on the table, and stepped back into the misty morning. The Smuggler's Bridge was quieter now, the crowd of onlookers gone. The river roared below, its waters churning with secrets. Miss Marple approached the spot where the body had been found, her eyes scanning the muddy bank. The footprint she'd seen last night was fainter now, blurred by the morning's drizzle, but something else caught her eye. A scrap of fabric, dark and torn, snagged on a jagged stone at the bridge's base. She knelt, careful not to disturb the mud, and retrieved the fabric with her handkerchief. It was coarse, navy wool stained with what might have been blood. A coat, perhaps, or a cloak. It didn't match the fine tailoring of the stranger's cufflink or watch. Miss Marple tucked the fabric into her bag, her thoughts racing. A second person at the scene, perhaps, or a clumsy attempt to cover tracks. As she straightened, a shadow moved at the edge of her vision. Tom Baines, one of the farmhands from the pub, stood at the far end of the bridge, his cap pulled low. "You shouldn't be here, ma'am," he called, his voice rough. "Bridge ain't safe." "So I've heard," Miss Marple said, her tone pleasant. "But it's a fine view, don't you think? Do you come here often, Mr. Baines?" His eyes narrowed. "Not if I can help it. Place gives me the creeps." He turned abruptly, striding into the fog. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind weaving connections. Tuttle's unease, Lyle's nervousness, Eliza's cryptic hint, and now Tom's defensiveness, and the fabric, a clue that didn't fit the stranger's polished appearance. She thought of the old smuggling tales Clara had mentioned, of lanterns flickering in the night. Was the bridge still a crossing for illicit goods, or for darker deeds? As she walked back to Clara's cottage, the mist seemed to thicken, muffling the world. But Miss Marple's thoughts were clear. The stranger's death was no accident, and the answers lay not just in the bridge's shadows but in the hearts of St. Alban's villagers. She would need to listen closely, watch carefully, and wait for the next thread to unravel. Chapter 3. The lantern's glow. The fire in Clara Winthrop's parlour cast a warm, flickering glow, but it did little to dispel the chill that lingered in Miss Jane Marple's thoughts. She sat in an armchair, her knitting needles clicking softly, the navy wool fabric from the Smuggler's Bridge tucked carefully in her bag. The morning at the Red Lion had revealed much about St. Alban's. Mr. Tuttle's guarded demeanour, Reverend Lyle's nervous haste, Eliza Drake's sharp-edged hints, and Tom Baines's unease. But it was the fabric, coarse and blood-stained, that tugged at her mind like a loose stitch. Clara bustled in with a tray of scones, her face drawn. "Jane, you've hardly touched your tea," she said, setting the tray down. "You're thinking about that dreadful business, aren't you? I wish you'd leave it to Constable Harrow." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled over her knitting. "Constable Harrow is a fine young man, Clara, but he's yet to learn that villages like St. Alban's keep their truths close. Tell me, have you ever seen lights on the bridge at night, as Mrs. Gibbs claims?" Clara's hands faltered, a scone crumbling slightly. "Lights? Oh, Jane! It's just old tales. Smugglers' lanterns, they say, from years ago. But no one's seen such things in ages. Not until recently." Her voice dropped. "Mrs. Gibbs swears she saw a glow 2 nights ago before the body was found. But she's half-blind and fond of her sherry." "Even half-blind eyes see something," Miss Marple murmured. She set her knitting aside, her mind turning to Eliza's words. Things get lost there. And found. I think I'll take another walk, Clara. The bridge at dusk might offer a clearer view. Clara's eyes widened. At dusk? Jane, it's not safe. What if whatever did this is still out there? Miss Marple smiled, patting her friend's hand. I've faced worse than a chilly evening, my dear. Besides, I have my umbrella. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep blue and grey, Miss Marple made her way to the Smuggler's Bridge. The village was quiet, the cottages shuttered against the gathering mist. The river roared below, its voice louder in the stillness, and the bridge loomed ahead, its stones black against the fading light. She paused at the parapet, her gloved hands resting on the cold stone, and listened. The wind carried a faint creak, not of wood, but of metal, rhythmic, deliberate. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the shadows. At the bridge's far end, where the path curved into a thicket, a faint golden glow flickered, then vanished. A lantern, she thought, her heart quickening. She moved silently, her sensible shoes soft on the cobblestones, and approached the thicket. The glow reappeared, dim but steady, emanating from a small rusted lantern half hidden among the bracken. Miss Marple knelt, careful not to disturb the surrounding earth. The lantern was old, its glass cracked but intact, its base engraved with a faint symbol, a crescent moon crossed by a dagger. She turned it over, noting a smear of wax on the handle, still soft as if recently lit. Whoever had left it here had been careless, or interrupted. She wrapped it in her handkerchief, tucking it into her bag beside the fabric. A twig snapped behind her, and she turned to see Ned Carter, the farmhand from the Red Lion, emerging from the fog. His face was pale, his cap clutched in his hands, but his eyes were hard. "What are you doing here, ma'am?" he asked, his voice rough. "Bridge ain't no place for a lady at night." Miss Marple rose, her expression serene. "Merely admiring the view, Mr. Carter, though it seems I'm not the only one drawn here. Do you often walk this way?" Ned's jaw tightened. "Just checking my traps. Foxes, you know. Been trouble lately." His eyes flicked to her bag and she sensed a flicker of recognition. Or fear. "Foxes indeed," she said lightly. "Though I wonder if it's foxes that light lanterns. Good evening, Mr. Carter." She turned, her steps measured, but she felt his gaze on her back until the fog swallowed her silhouette. Back at Clara's cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, the lantern and fabric laid out on the table. Clara gasped at the sight. "Jane, where did you find that? It's one of those old smuggling lanterns. My father had one like it years ago. Said they used them to signal across the river." "Signal to whom, I wonder?" Miss Marple mused, her fingers tracing the crescent and dagger symbol. "And why now? After all these years?" She thought of the stranger's gold watch and cufflink, both marked J.H., and the coarse fabric that didn't match. The lantern suggested the smuggling tales were more than folklore, and that someone in St. Albans was keeping them alive. Her thoughts drifted to the villagers, Tuttle, who claimed not to have seen the stranger but polished his glasses with too much force. Reverend Lyle, whose nervous haste betrayed more than piety. Eliza, whose cryptic words hinted at knowledge she wouldn't share. And now Ned, caught near the bridge with no good reason. Each was a thread, and the lantern was a new knot in the pattern. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. The Smuggler's Bridge was no mere relic. It was a stage, and the players were still moving in the shadows. She would need to watch them closely, for the next clue might be the one to unravel the truth. Chapter 4. The Vicar's Secret. The church of St. Albans stood at the edge of the village, its grey stone spire piercing the morning mist like a needle through silk. Miss Jane Marple walked the gravel path to its door. Her knitting bag tucked under her arm, the weight of the lantern and torn fabric from the Smuggler's Bridge a quiet reminder of the puzzle she was piecing together. The gold cufflink, the blood-stained wool, the lantern with its crescent and dagger symbol, all pointed to a truth buried deep in the village's heart. But it was Reverend Lyle's nervous demeanour at the Red Lion that drew her here today. A vicar, she knew, could hide as many secrets as any smuggler. The church door creaked as she entered, the air cool and heavy with the scent of old wood and candle wax. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting patches of deep blue and grey across the pews. Reverend Lyle knelt at the altar, his head bowed, but his shoulders stiffened as her footsteps echoed. "Good morning, Reverend," Miss Marple called, her voice soft but clear. "I hope I'm not interrupting your prayers." Lyle rose, his thin face pale, his eyes darting to the shadows. "Miss Marple," he said, forcing a smile, "a pleasure to see you. I was just preparing for tomorrow's service." His hands fidgeted with his prayer book, and Miss Marple noted the tremor in his fingers. "A fine church," she said, settling into a pew. "So peaceful, though I imagine it's been less so with the trouble at the bridge." Lyle's smile faltered. "A tragedy, yes, the poor man. I've prayed for his soul, though we know so little of him." He clutched the prayer book tighter, and Miss Marple's keen eyes caught a slip of paper protruding from its pages. "Indeed," she said, her tone mild. "A stranger with a gold watch and cufflink, both marked J.H. Curious, don't you think? Almost as curious as lanterns lit at night." She watched his face closely, noting the flush that crept up his neck. Lanterns, Lyle's voice was a touch too high. Village gossip, nothing more. Smuggler's tales from my grandfather's time. He turned toward the vestry as if eager to escape. "If you'll excuse me, I must fetch my notes." "May I see the vicarage?" Miss Marple asked, rising. "Clara speaks so fondly of its garden." Lyle hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Of course, this way." The vicarage was a modest cottage beside the church, its walls lined with ivy and its windows dim with dust. Inside, the parlour was cluttered with books and papers, a stark contrast to the church's order. Miss Marple's eyes swept the room, landing on a small desk in the corner, its drawer slightly ajar. "You keep busy, Reverend," she said, her fingers brushing the desk as she admired a vase of wilted roses. "So many papers." "Just parish records," Lyle said quickly, moving to close the drawer. But Miss Marple was quicker, her hand resting lightly on a leather-bound ledger that lay open. Its pages were filled with dates and initials, some recent, J.H. among them, paired with numbers that looked like sums, not tithes. "Parish records?" she asked, her voice innocent. "These seem rather specific." Lyle's face drained of colour. "Old accounts," he stammered. "From my predecessor. I really must—" A knock at the door interrupted him. Eliza Drake stood in the doorway, her cloche hat tilted, her eyes sharp as ever. "Reverend, I brought the hymnals you asked for," she said, her gaze flicking to Miss Marple. "Didn't expect to see you here, Miss Marple. Still chasing shadows?" "Merely visiting," Miss Marple replied, her smile unwavering. "Those shadows do have a way of revealing things, don't they?" Eliza's lips twitched, but she said nothing, setting the hymnals on a table. As she turned to leave, her prayer book slipped from her coat, landing open on the floor. A folded note fluttered out, its edge singed as if by a flame. Miss Marple bent to retrieve it, her fingers brushing the paper. "Oh dear," she said, handing the book back but keeping the note. "You've dropped something." Eliza's eyes narrowed, but she took the book without comment and left, her steps quick and sharp. Lyle, visibly shaken, excused himself to tend to the church, leaving Miss Marple alone in the parlour. She unfolded the note carefully. Scrawled in hasty ink were the words, "Bridge, Midnight, J.H." The paper smelled faintly of wax, like the lantern she'd found. Her heart quickened. The ledger, the note, the lantern, all tied to the bridge and to the stranger's initials. Was Lyle involved in something darker than sermons? And Eliza? Her presence here was no coincidence. Miss Marple tucked the note into her bag, beside the lantern and fabric, her mind weaving the threads together. The smuggling tales were alive, and someone in St. Albans was pulling the strings. She stepped outside, the mist thicker now, curling around the church like a shroud. The village felt smaller, its secrets pressing closer. As she walked back to Clara's cottage, she thought of the villagers. Tuttle's guarded glances, Ned's defensiveness, Eliza's cryptic warnings, and now Lyle's ledger. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture was still incomplete. At the cottage, Clara greeted her with a worried frown. "Jane, you look troubled. What did you find?" "Only what was meant to be hidden," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but her eyes bright. She would return to the bridge tonight, she decided. Midnight, the note had said. The smuggler's bridge was calling, and Miss Marple never ignored a call. Chapter 5. The Midnight Watch. The clock in Clara Winthrop's cottage struck 11. its chimes soft but insistent against the quiet of the night. Miss Jane Marple sat by the parlour window, her knitting needles idle, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond. The singed note from Reverend Lyle's vicarage lay on the table, its words, Bridge, Midnight, J.H., etched in her mind. The gold cufflink, the blood-stained fabric, the lantern with its crescent and dagger symbol, and the cryptic ledger had woven a pattern, but it was incomplete. Tonight the smuggler's bridge might offer the next thread. Clara, wrapped in a shawl, hovered by the fire. "Jane, you can't mean to go out there," she said, her voice trembling. "Not at midnight. What if it's dangerous?" Miss Marple's smile was gentle but firm. "Danger, my dear Clara, often hides in the ordinary. I'll be quite safe with my umbrella and my wits." She tucked the note into her bag, alongside the lantern and fabric, and pulled on her coat. The night was cold, the mist thicker than ever, curling around St Albans like a shroud. The path to the smuggler's bridge was silent, save for the distant rush of the river and the occasional hoot of an owl. Miss Marple moved carefully, her lantern unlit to avoid detection, her footsteps muffled by the damp earth. The bridge loomed ahead, its stone arch black against the starry sky, its shadows deeper than the night itself. She paused at the edge of the thicket where she'd found the lantern, her breath steady but her senses alert. As the village clock struck midnight, a faint glow appeared at the far end of the bridge, flickering like a firefly. Miss Marple crouched behind a gnarled oak, her eyes narrowing. Two figures emerged from the mist, their silhouettes indistinct but purposeful. One was tall and broad, the other slighter, moving with a nervous gait. Their voices were low, carried away by the wind, but she caught fragments. Late, risky, he knew too much. The taller figure lit a match, briefly illuminating a ruddy face. Mr. Tuttle, the innkeeper from the Red Lion. The other, partially obscured, clutched a bundle under their arm. Tuttle's voice was gruff. "No more mistakes. The last one cost us dearly." The second figure nodded, then slipped, into the shadows, leaving Tuttle alone on the bridge. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Tuttle, so quick to dismiss the stranger's death, was here at midnight, speaking of risks and mistakes. Was he tied to the smuggling rumours, or something darker? As he turned to leave, something fell from his coat, glinting faintly in the moonlight. He didn't notice, his footsteps heavy as he vanished into the fog. She waited until the bridge was still, then approached the spot. There, half buried in the mud, was a small tobacco tin, its lid etched with the same crescent and dagger symbol as the lantern. She pried it open with a handkerchief, revealing a pinch of tobacco and a folded scrap of paper. The paper bore a single word: Cove. Miss Marple tucked the tin into her bag, her mind racing. A cove near the bridge, perhaps a smuggler's hideout, and Tuttle's presence suggested he knew more than he'd let on at the Red Lion. As she rose, a rustle in the thicket made her freeze. Her hand tightened on her umbrella, but no one emerged. The night was alive with secrets, and she felt the weight of unseen eyes. She retraced her steps to the village, the tin a new piece in the puzzle. The stranger J.H. had come to St Albans with a purpose, perhaps to meet someone at the bridge, perhaps to uncover the smuggling ring hinted at by the lantern, ledger, and now the tin. But who had ensured he never left? Back at Clara's cottage, the fire had dwindled to embers. Miss Marple sat at the table, spreading her clues before her. The cufflink, the fabric, the lantern, the note, and now the tobacco tin. Each pointed to the bridge, to smuggling, to J.H. She thought of Tuttle's guarded eyes, Reverend Lyle's nervous ledger, Eliza Drake's cryptic hints, and Ned Carter's defensiveness. The village was a tapestry of motives, and the smuggler's bridge was its darkest thread. Clara stirred, her voice sleepy but anxious. "Jane, did you find anything? You look troubled." "Troubled? No," Miss Marple said, her needles resuming their soft click. "But curious, yes. The bridge keeps its secrets, Clara, but not for long." She thought of the cove mentioned in the tin. Tomorrow she would explore the riverbank, seeking the hidden place where smugglers might still tread. For now she would watch and listen, as she always did, for the truth was never far from those who knew where to look. Chapter 6. The Cove's Secret. The morning mist hung heavy over St Albans, cloaking the river in a veil of deep blue and grey. Miss Jane Marple stood at the edge of Clara Winthrop's garden, her knitting bag heavy with clues, the gold cufflink, the blood-stained fabric, the lantern with its crescent and dagger symbol, the singed note, and the tobacco tin with its cryptic mention of Cove. The midnight meeting on the Smuggler's Bridge, where she'd seen Mr. Tuttle and an unknown figure, had confirmed her suspicions. The bridge was no relic of past crimes, but a stage for present ones. Today she would follow the tin's clue to the riverbank, seeking the cove where smugglers might still hide their secrets. Clara, stirring porridge in the kitchen, cast a worried glance. "Jane, you're not going to the river, are you? After last night? The bridge is bad enough, but the cove, folks say it's haunted." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Haunted or not, Clara, a cove is just a place, and places hold answers. I'll be back for tea." She pulled on her coat, her umbrella a reassuring weight in her hand, and set out. The path to the Smuggler's Bridge was familiar now, its cobblestones slick with dew. The river roared below, its waters churning as if impatient to speak. Miss Marple veered off the main path, following the riverbank downstream, where the land dipped into a tangle of reeds and willows. The word cove suggested a hidden inlet, a place smugglers might use to conceal their wares. She moved carefully, her sensible shoes sinking into the mud, her eyes scanning for signs of disturbance. After a quarter mile, the bank curved sharply, revealing a narrow inlet sheltered by overhanging willows. The water was calmer here, lapping against a rocky outcrop that hid a low, dark opening. A cave, barely visible unless one knew where to look. Miss Marple's heart quickened. This was the cove, and it was no natural hollow. The entrance was framed by weathered timbers, their edges worn but deliberate, as if carved long ago for secretive purposes. She crouched, peering into the darkness. The air smelled of damp stone and something sharper. Tar, perhaps, or oil. Stepping inside, she let her eyes adjust to the dimness, the faint light from the entrance casting long shadows. Wooden crates lined the walls, their lids marked with the crescent and dagger symbols she'd seen on the lantern and tin. She pried one open with her umbrella, revealing tightly packed bottles, brandy by the smell, wrapped in straw. Smuggling, then, was alive in St. Albans, and the stranger, J.H., had likely stumbled upon it. As she examined a crate, a glint in the corner caught her eye. A coil of rope, coarse and blood-stained, lay half-hidden behind a rock. She knelt, her gloved fingers tracing the stains. The blood was dry, dark against the hemp, and the rope's end was frayed, as if snapped under strain. Had it been used to bind someone, or to drag a body? She tucked it into her bag, her mind racing. The rope, like the fabric, didn't match the stranger's fine attire, suggesting another player in this deadly game. A rustle outside made her freeze. She slipped behind a crate, her breath steady but her senses sharp. Footsteps squelched in the mud, heavy and uneven, and a figure appeared at the cave's entrance. Tom Baines, the farmhand, his face pale and his eyes wild. He carried a sack, its contents clinking softly, and he muttered to himself, "Not again. Not like him." Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice calm, but firm. "Good morning, Mr. Baines. An odd place for a morning walk, isn't it?" Tom started, nearly dropping the sack. "Miss Marple, I was just checking the river. Fish, you know." His hands trembled and his eyes darted to the crates, betraying his lie. "Fish don't keep in crates," she said gently, her gaze steady. "Nor do they leave blood on ropes. You seem troubled, Mr. Baines. Is there something you'd like to share?" His face crumpled, a mix of fear and defiance. "You don't understand, ma'am. You shouldn't be here. It's not safe. Not for you. Not for anyone." He turned, fleeing into the mist before she could press further. Miss Marple watched him go, her thoughts weaving a tighter pattern. Tom's fear, Tuttle's midnight meeting, Lyle's ledger, Eliza's hints, and now the cave's contraband, all pointed to a smuggling ring, with the stranger's death at its heart. The blood-stained rope suggested violence, perhaps a struggle on the bridge, but whose hand had wielded it? She left the cave, the mist closing around her as she retraced her steps to the village. The Smuggler's Bridge loomed in the distance, its stones silent but heavy with secrets. Back at Clara's cottage, she would examine the rope alongside her other clues, searching for the thread that tied them together. For now she knew one thing. The cove was no mere hideout. but a key to unlocking the truth. Chapter 7. The Smuggler's Map. The afternoon light filtered weakly through the mist, casting a soft grey glow over Clara Winthrop's cottage. Miss Jane Marple sat at the kitchen table, her knitting needles still, her clues spread before her like cards in a game of patience. The gold cufflink and watch marked JH, the blood-stained fabric, the lantern with its crescent and dagger symbol, the singed note reading Bridge, Midnight, JH, the tobacco tin with its mention of Cove, and the blood-stained rope from the smuggler's cave. Each was a thread in the tapestry of St. Aldan's secrets, and the cave had confirmed that smuggling was no mere legend but a living crime. Yet the stranger's death, murder, she was certain, remained the knot she needed to unravel. Clara hovered nearby, her hands twisting her apron. "Jane, you've been staring at those things for hours. What do they mean? And that rope, it's dreadful. Are you sure you should keep poking about?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Poking about, Clara, is how one finds the truth. I'm beginning to think the Smuggler's Bridge is more than a crossing. It's a map of sorts, and I need to know where it leads." She tapped the tobacco tin, the word Cove echoing in her mind. The cave was one piece, but the crescent and dagger symbol suggested a broader network. "Is there a village archive, Clara? Old records might shed light on the bridge's past." Clara nodded, though her frown deepened. "The town hall keeps some dusty papers, maps, deeds, that sort of thing. Old Mr. Grayson looks after them, but he's half deaf and particular. You'll need patience." "Patience," Miss Marple said, rising, "is something I have in abundance." She gathered her bag, the clues carefully stowed, and set out for the town hall. The town hall was a modest building on the village green, its stone walls weathered by time. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and wax. Mr. Grayson, a stooped man with spectacles perched on his nose, peered at her suspiciously. "Archives? What's a lady like you want with those?" "Merely an interest in history," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "The Smuggler's Bridge in particular. I hear it has quite a story." Grayson grunted, but led her to a cramped room lined with shelves. "Mind you don't disturb anything," he muttered, leaving her to a pile of yellowed documents. Miss Marple's fingers moved deftly, sifting through deeds and parish records until she found a leather folder labelled Bridge Records, 1800 and 1900. Inside was a folded map, its edges frayed but its ink still vivid. Her breath caught as she saw it, a detailed sketch of the Smuggler's Bridge and the river, with a crescent and dagger symbol marking a spot beneath the bridge's western arch. The map showed a hidden passage, a tunnel running from the riverbank to a chamber under the bridge. Notations in faded ink listed dates and goods, brandy, tobacco, silks, smuggled through the passage in the 19th century. A more recent note in fresher ink read, "J.H., 1925, delivery." Miss Marple's heart quickened. The stranger had been here, connected to the smuggling ring, and someone had ensured he never left. She tucked the map into her bag, her mind racing. The tunnel could explain the lantern signals, the midnight meetings, the cave's contraband. But why had J.H. been killed? Had he betrayed the smugglers, or uncovered something they couldn't allow? She needed to see the bridge again, to find this hidden passage. As she stepped out of the town hall, Constable Harrow approached, his young face troubled. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his cap. "Heard you've been asking questions. Found anything I should know about?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but her tone was cautious. "Only that St. Aldan's has a rich history, Constable. Have you learned more about our stranger? Those initials, J.H., are quite distinctive." Harrow's jaw tightened. "No papers yet, but that watch and cufflink. They're fine work, not local. I'm starting to think he wasn't just passing through. And that footprint you pointed out, it's too big for him. Someone else was there." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "I saw Tuttle near the bridge last night, late, looked shifty. You think he's involved?" "Suspicions are like shadows, Constable," Miss Marple said gently. "They shift until you find the light. Keep watching, and we'll see what turns up." She noted his earnestness, but also his youth. Harrow was no fool, but he might stir the pot too soon. As she walked back to Clara's cottage, the mist seemed to press closer, the village quieter than ever. The map in her bag was a key, but to what lock? Tuttle's midnight presence, Tom's fear, Lyle's ledger, Eliza's hints, all circled the bridge, and now the tunnel beneath it. The blood-stained rope suggested a struggle, perhaps in that very passage. Miss Marple's needles would resume their rhythm tonight, but her thoughts were already on the bridge, where the next clue waited in the dark. Chapter 8. The tunnel's echo. The evening mist settled over St Albans like a velvet curtain, muffling the world and lending the Smuggler's Bridge an air of quiet menace. Miss Jane Marple stood at the riverbank, her lantern dimmed to a faint golden glow, the smuggler's map from the village archives tucked in her knitting bag, alongside the gold cufflink, blood-stained fabric, lantern, singed note, tobacco tin, and blood-stained rope. The map's crescent and dagger symbol, and its notation of a hidden tunnel beneath the bridge, had sparked her curiosity. The stranger, J.H., had died here, and the tunnel might hold the final piece of the puzzle, a truth the villagers of St Albans were keen to keep buried. Clara had pleaded with her to stay indoors, her voice trembling with fear. "Jane, that tunnel's no place for you. Smugglers, murderers, who knows what's down there?" But Miss Marple had only smiled, her umbrella in hand, and promised to be back for supper. Now, as the village clock chimed 7, she descended the muddy bank to the western arch of the bridge, where the map marked the tunnel's entrance. The river roared nearby, its waters black and restless. Miss Marple's eyes traced the stone arch, finding a narrow crevice hidden by overgrown ivy. She pushed the vines aside, revealing a low wooden door, its hinges rusted but intact, marked faintly with the crescent and dagger symbol. Her heart quickened as she tested the door. It creaked open, exhaling a damp, musty breath. She stepped inside, her lantern casting long shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The tunnel was narrow, its floor slick with mud, sloping downward toward a chamber. The air was thick with the scent of tar and salt, and faint scratches on the walls suggested crates dragged through recently. As she ventured deeper, her lantern illuminated a small alcove stacked with barrels, more contraband, likely brandy or tobacco, marked with the same crescent and dagger symbol. This was no relic of the past. The smuggling ring was active and the stranger's death was tied to it. At the far end of the alcove something caught her eye, a white cloth, crumpled and half buried in the mud. She knelt, retrieving it with her handkerchief. It was a monogrammed handkerchief, its fine linen stained with dark, dried blood, embroidered with the initials J.H. Miss Marple's breath caught. This was the stranger's, no doubt, and the blood suggested a struggle here, in the tunnel, before his body was left on the riverbank. Had he been lured here, betrayed by someone he trusted? As she tucked the handkerchief into her bag, a soft scuff echoed behind her. She turned, her lantern raised, to find Eliza Drake standing at the tunnel's entrance, her cloche hat tilted, her eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You're persistent, Miss Marple," Eliza said, her voice low and edged with something like admiration. "Most would have left the bridge alone by now." Miss Marple's smile was serene, but her grip on her umbrella tightened. "And yet here we are, Mrs. Drake. You seem familiar with this tunnel, a curious place for a widow to wander." Eliza's lips curved, not quite a smile. "I know the village, that's all. My late husband used to talk of the old smuggling days, said this tunnel was a gold mine once." She stepped closer, her eyes flicking to the handkerchief in Miss Marple's hand. "You've found something, haven't you? Be careful. It's not just brandy they're hiding." "And what else might they hide?" Miss Marple asked, her tone mild but her gaze sharp. Eliza hesitated, then shrugged. "Secrets, debts, blood. You're clever enough to guess." She turned, her footsteps echoing as she vanished into the tunnel's darkness. Miss Marple stood still, her mind weaving the clues together. The handkerchief, bloodied and monogrammed, placed J.H. in this tunnel, likely meeting his end here. Eliza's presence was no coincidence. She knew too much, her hints too pointed. The smuggling ring, with its barrels and symbols, was the key, and the suspects, Tuttle's midnight meeting, Tom's fear, Lyle's ledger, and now Eliza's knowledge, were closing in on a single truth. She emerged from the tunnel, the mist thicker now, curling around the bridge like a living thing. The river's roar seemed louder, as if echoing the violence that had taken place here. Back at Clara's cottage, she would lay out her clues once more, the handkerchief joining the growing collection. The Smuggler's Bridge was a stage, and the final act was near. She would need to tread carefully, for the killer was watching, and the next move might be her last. Chapter 9. The bridge's truth. The fire in Clara Winthrop's cottage cast a golden glow, but the air was heavy with the weight of secrets. Miss Jane Marple sat at the table, her knitting needles silent, her clues laid out like a completed puzzle. The gold cufflink and watch marked J.H., the blood-stained fabric, the lantern with its crescent and dagger symbol, the singed note reading bridge, midnight J.H., the tobacco tin mentioning cove, the blood-stained rope, the smuggler's map, and the monogrammed handkerchief. Each piece had led her to this moment, the night when the smuggler's bridge would yield its final truth. Clara paced, her hands twisting her shawl. "Jane, you're not going back to that bridge, are you? Not after the tunnel. It's too dangerous." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but her voice was firm. "Danger, Clara, is only dangerous when you don't see it coming. I've invited a few friends to the bridge tonight. The truth, like a good knit, needs all its threads pulled tight." She gathered her clues, her umbrella at the ready, and stepped into the misty night. The smuggler's bridge loomed under a starless sky, its stones black and slick with fog. Miss Marple had sent word to Constable Harrow, Mr. Tuttle, Reverend Lyle, Eliza Drake, Tom Baines, and Ned Carter, asking them to meet her here at 10. They arrived one by one, their faces shadowed by suspicion and fear. Harrow stood by the parapet, his lantern casting a golden glow. Tuttle's ruddy face was grim, Lyle's hands trembled, Eliza's eyes were sharp, and Tom and Ned shifted uneasily, avoiding each other's gaze. "Thank you for coming," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but carrying over the river's roar. "The smuggler's bridge has kept its secrets long enough. A man, J.H., died here, and I believe one of you knows why," Tuttle scoffed. "This is nonsense. He fell, that's all. You've no proof of anything else." Miss Marple's smile was serene. "Proof, Mr. Tuttle, is in the details. Let us begin with J.H., a stranger with a gold watch and cufflink, both monogrammed. He wasn't passing through. He came to St. Alban's for a purpose, as the note in Reverend Lyle's prayer book confirms. Bridge, midnight, J.H. Lyle flinched, but she continued. "The smuggler's map from the archives, marked with a crescent and dagger symbol, shows a tunnel beneath this bridge, used for smuggling brandy and tobacco, as I found in the cove's cave." She held up the lantern. "This, found near the bridge, signalled meetings, like the one I witnessed with you, Mr. Tuttle, and another figure. The tobacco tin, dropped that night, pointed me to the cove. The blood-stained rope and handkerchief found in the tunnel placed J.H. there, where he met his end, not by a fall, but by murder." Eliza's eyes narrowed. "And what's that to do with us? You're spinning tales, Miss Marple." "Not tales," Miss Marple said, producing the blood-stained fabric. "This, found near the body, matches the coarse wool of a coat I saw in the Red Lion's back room, Mr. Tuttle, and the rope. Its blood matches the handkerchiefs, suggesting J.H. was bound before he was struck." She turned to Lyle. "Your ledger, Reverend, lists J.H. with recent sums, not tithes. You were tracking smuggling profits, weren't you?" Lyle's face crumpled. I only kept records. I didn't kill him." "But you knew," Miss Marple said gently. "And you, Tom Baines, were in the cave, terrified. You saw something, didn't you?" Tom looked away, his hands shaking. She faced Eliza. "You hinted at secrets, Mrs. Drake, and knew of the tunnel. But it was Ned Carter who sealed J.H.'s fate." Ned stiffened, his eyes wild. "The footprint by the body was yours, Ned. Too large for J.H., and your boots match the mud in the tunnel. You were there, with Tuttle, when J.H. came to collect his share of the smuggling profits. He threatened to expose you, didn't he? So you struck him, bound him with the rope, and left him on the riverbank to look like an accident." Ned lunged forward, but Harrow seized him. "You've no proof," Ned shouted. "The handkerchief," Miss Marple said, holding it up. "J.H. dropped it in the struggle, and your coat, torn in the fight, left that fabric. You underestimated a village, Ned, and its eyes." She turned to Harrow. "Constable, I believe you'll find the rest in the tunnel. More evidence of their trade." Harrow nodded, his face grim. "I'll take it from here, Miss Marple. Ned, you're coming with me." As he led Ned away, the others dispersed, their secrets laid bare. The bridge stood silent, its shadows lighter now. Miss Marple returned to Clara's cottage, the mist lifting as dawn approached. The smuggler's bridge had spoken, and its truth was clear. She would knit tonight, her puzzle complete. but St. Albans would never forget the night its secrets unravelled. Chapter 10. The Village's Silence. The morning sun broke through the mist over St. Albans, casting a soft golden light across the village green. For the first time in days, the air felt lighter, as if the Smuggler's Bridge had exhaled its secrets. Miss Jane Marple sat in Clara Winthrop's parlour, her knitting needles clicking softly, her bag packed for her return to St. Mary Mead. The clues that had unravelled the mystery, the gold cufflink and watch-marked J.H., the blood-stained fabric, the lantern with its crescent and dagger symbol, the singed note, the tobacco tin, the blood-stained rope, the smuggler's map, and the monogrammed handkerchief were no longer needed, their story told. But the village, she knew, would carry the weight of that story for years. Clara set a teapot on the table, her hands steadier now. "Jane, I still can't believe it," she said, her voice soft but relieved. "Ned Carter, of all people, and Tuttle, Lyle, even Eliza, part of that smuggling ring. You saw it all, didn't you?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled over her knitting. "Not all, Clara, but enough. People you see are like patterns, predictable once you spot the stitches. Ned's fear, Tuttle's secrecy, Lyle's guilt, Eliza's sharpness, they all pointed to the truth. The bridge was their stage, and J.H. was the player who fell." A knock at the door announced Constable Harrow, his young face weary but resolute. He tipped his cap, settling into a chair. "Miss Marple, I owe you thanks. We searched the tunnel after your tip, found more crates, brandy, tobacco, even some jewellery. The smuggling ring's done for. Ned's confessed, says he struck J.H. when he threatened to go to the police. Tuttle's talking too, and Lyle's turned over his ledger. Eliza, well, she's claiming she only passed messages." Miss Marple nodded, her needles pausing. "And J.H.? Have you learned who he was?" Harrow produced a sealed envelope, its edges worn but its wax seal intact. "This came this morning from London, addressed to the constable's office. About J.H. Thought you'd want to see it." She opened it carefully, revealing a letter from a Mrs. Helen Harper, J.H.'s sister. It read, "My brother James Harper went to St. Albans to investigate a smuggling ring he'd uncovered in his work as a customs officer. He feared for his life, said the bridge was key. If you're reading this, he's likely gone. Please find justice." The letter was dated a week before his death, a precaution that had arrived too late. Miss Marple folded the letter, her heart heavy but her mind clear. "James Harper," she said softly. "A man who saw too much and paid the price. His watch, his cufflink, his handkerchief. They marked him as an outsider, but his purpose was justice. The Smuggler's Bridge betrayed him, but it also betrayed his killers." Harrow nodded, his eyes earnest. "We'll make sure Mrs. Harper knows he didn't die in vain. The ring's broken thanks to you. But how did you know, Miss Marple? All those clues? How did you piece them together?" She smiled, her needles resuming their rhythm. "Observation, Constable. A footprint too large, a fabric too coarse, a lantern left burning. They're small things, but small things tell stories. Ned's boots, Tuttle's coat, Lyle's ledger, Eliza's hints, they all spoke if you listened, and the bridge, of course, whispered loudest." Clara shook her head, marvelling. "You make it sound so simple, Jane. But what now? Will St. Albans ever be the same?" "No village is ever the same after a truth like this," Miss Marple said gently. "But it will heal, Clara. Secrets fester, but sunlight mends." She rose, her bag packed, and stepped outside for a final walk through St. Albans. The green was quiet, the Red Lion sign creaking softly, the church spire piercing the clearing mist. The Smuggler's Bridge stood in the distance, its stones no longer menacing but sombre, as if mourning the lives it had claimed. Miss Marple paused at the edge of the green, her eyes tracing the village's outlines. Tuttle would face charges, Lyle would seek atonement, Eliza would slip away, her secrets half told, and Ned, the killer, would answer for his crime. As she boarded the afternoon train, the mist lifted fully, revealing St. Albans in all its quiet beauty. The bridge would stand, its stories fading into legend once more. But Miss Marple knew that human nature, with its greed and fear, would always weave new patterns, and she would always be ready to unravel them.